Hi, my name is Tazi, and I was raised by apes. When I was 8 years old, I have vague memories of being brought to this island by my human parents. I don't know why they were here. All I know is that they never survived. One night, a jaguar came into our shelter and killed them. I would have been jaguar food next if it weren't for the apes. One ape, I call her Ma, suddenly appeared and defeated the jaguar before it could eat me. Ma then found me, just a little girl, all alone, and decided to take me in. I've been living with the apes ever since. We don't have a language like humans do, but we communicate through our body movement. And since I was 8 years old when I was taken in by the apes, I could still speak some English, though not very well. It was tough adapting to this new life. I remember one time they were teaching me how to swing from tree to tree, and as I let go of the branch, it snapped and I nearly fell to my death. But Ma quickly jumped forward and rescued me. It's taken a lot of getting used to. But now, at 16 years of age, the apes have become my family, and I have become less of a human and more of an ape. Once my family started to trust me, they revealed to me something very special about them. Their hair is as strong as steel. For real! You could shoot an arrow at their back and it would not break through their hair armor. Because of this, I'd always felt self-conscious since I didn't have the same impenetrable hair as them on my body, but Ma always made sure I felt included. One day, we were patrolling the island's edge when suddenly Ma made a lot of noises and gestures towards the beach. We all gathered around and I gasped. There was what appeared to be a giant wooden thing on shore, which I now know was a boat. And from the boat, up popped a creature. And the strangest thing was, the creature looked just like me. Immediately, the other apes scattered and ran back home. Ma called me to come too, but curiosity got the better of me. I gestured to her to go on home while I went to investigate who this strange intruder was. Slowly, I watched the human as he walked towards the jungle's edge. He looked good. I suppose handsome was the word. And for some reason, I had this sudden urge to expose myself and come out into the open. Ah! Who are you? I crawled towards him, still on all fours. Strange. He walked just on his 2 legs. Curious, I slowly stood up in front of him, copying his movements. Who are you? Something clicked in my brain, an old memory. This language, English. I knew how to use it, but it was difficult. Me, Tazi. The guy looked flabbergasted. He stepped forward, and I reared back, hissing at him. Okay, I'm sorry. Do you live here? I processed his words, then nodded my head. By yourself? I shook my head. Family. You live here with your family. Who's your family? I pointed at the jungle. Apes. That's incredible. I stared at him, and he stared at me, and I felt a tug at my heart, although I wasn't quite sure why. Your name? He smiled. My name's Edward, and I'm an explorer from England. England? Yes, it's a cold and miserable place. Nothing like this beautiful island of yours. I just stared at him, unsure of what to say or do next. Listen, Tazi. Would you or your family mind if I stayed on this island for a while? I won't make much noise and I promise I won't bother you. I'm just a man who loves to travel, and I would really like to get to know you better, if that's all right. It took me some time to understand everything he said, but eventually I nodded. Yes, is okay. Edward grinned and he looked even more handsome. I think my stomach fluttered. It was such a peculiar feeling that I'd never experienced before. Can we meet again, same time tomorrow, same place? I nodded again, slightly dreamy. Great! It's nice to meet you, Tazi. I just stared at him. What was he doing? Edward seemed to understand, then gently held my hand and placed it in his, then raised it up and down several times, shaking hands. This is what we call a handshake. I stared in shock. It felt so strange, but also familiar? I was so confused, but also excited. As you can tell, I was feeling a lot of emotions at once. The next day, I returned to the same spot at the same time of day, and sure enough, there was Edward. This time, he had his own tiny tent on the beach with a small fire. He also had a stack of objects beside him, and it took me a lot of searching past memories to remember these were books. I've brought some English text to show you. If you would like, I could help you improve your English. I smiled. Okay. Thank you. Edward seemed to blush. Why was he blushing? I brushed the thought away and leaned in. Little Jane wanted to go to the market, but Little Jane didn't know which way to go. So Little Jane, it went on and on like that. For hours, Edward helped me learn more English. And by the end of our session, I had improved a lot. It seemed there had been a little vault in my brain where I had locked up my memories of English. But after Edward had helped me out, the vault had opened and now I could speak very well. Thank you, Edward. This has been so much fun. Of course, Tarzy. Anytime. Will you be back again tomorrow? Okay. I can trust you, right? Edward held a hand over his heart. Of course you can. I hesitated, but then I hugged Edward and ran off. Back behind the cover of trees, I turned to look at him to see his reaction. And he looked very flustered, but also very happy. I swung back through the jungle to where my family were resting. But when I arrived, I found them all gathered in a group. When I tried to enter their space to go to sleep, one of them screamed at me and pushed me away. I looked at Ma. She couldn't even make eye contact with me. I looked at all of their body language and I knew precisely what they were saying. You're not welcome here anymore. Tears welled in my eyes. Fine! I cried. They all looked at me strangely since I was speaking English. I don't need you anyway! I ran off, running on two legs as fast as I could, all the way back to Edward's tent. It was nighttime by now, so when I burst into his tent, he was very startled. Tarzy, are you okay? I leapt forward and hugged him. My family? They kicked me out. Can I stay with you? Edward looked very sad and hugged me closer. Of course you can. I'll look after you. I sighed deeply, and that night I slept wrapped in his arms. The next day, when I woke up, I immediately wanted to go back to my ape family and apologize for what I'd said. Even if they wouldn't understand, Edward convinced me not to. Maybe it's best if you just stay here with me, where you belong. You are human after all. I don't know, Edward. They're my family. Look, I'm not saying you forget about them, but maybe taking a break would be helpful. Maybe you're right. Edward held my hand softly. Of course, it's entirely your decision. I'll stay with you. I was hoping you'd say that. For many weeks, Edward and I spent every day together. We got really close, and eventually I decided to tell him the secret about my ape family. They're very precious. Oh, I'm sure they are. No, I mean, very precious. They have a very special ability. Oh? They have very strong hair. Strong hair? No, seriously, it's like strong as steel. Why are you laughing?
It's just funny the way you said it. Strong hair.
I smiled, then kissed him on the cheek. I'm so lucky to have you.
Trust me, I'm the lucky one.
I was the happiest I'd ever been in my life. Well, except for the fact that my ape family had ostracized me, but she can't win at everything. Suddenly, Edward looked very serious. There's something I have to tell you, Tarzy. What is it? Well, initially I came here alone, but tomorrow I think some of my other friends will be arriving here. Your other friends? Yes. But if you don't want them to be here, I'll tell them to leave straight away. No. I'd love to meet your friends. Great! I can't wait. The next day, just as he'd said, 2 giant boats arrived, loaded with other men just like Edward. Although they weren't nearly as handsome as he was. They arrived on shore with loud laughter, stomping along the plants and sand without any regret for the noise they were making. I was a little mad at first, but seeing Edward's happy face made me calm down.
Men, meet Tarzy. Boy, she is gorgeous.
You were raised by monkeys. Apes. That's mental.
Bonkers.
I laughed nervously. These men were certainly interesting. I wasn't sure if I quite liked humans.
We brought your pretty friend a dress to wear. Yes, something much better than those awful clothes of hers.
Men, don't speak to her that way.
No, Edward, it's all right. I'll wear the dress. Thank you for your gift. The men smiled, but for some reason their smiles made me uncomfortable. I went to change into the dress, and when I emerged, Edward looked in awe.
You're even more beautiful than before.
I blushed while the other men whooped and shouted. I did a little twirl. It felt nice. But then, suddenly, the cheerful shouts from the men turned into loud screams from the jungle. Emerging menacingly was my family. The apes.
Beasts! Monsters!
No, wait, they're not bad. But just as I was defending my family, I watched in horror as my cousin ran out and grabbed a barrel, throwing it and knocking one of the men out. They all erupted in screams.
Quick! Grab a weapon!
The apes attacked the humans. I knew my family was only doing this because they thought the humans were invading them, but they were wrong. It wasn't like that. Quickly, I ran in between the humans and apes. I went on all fours now, and I gestured at my family to retreat. Ma was there. She looked at me in my dress, a human dress, and she looked shocked.
Ma!
She backed away and ran off into the jungle. The others followed after her, leaving behind the chaos they had caused. I feel terrible. Because of me, the men's belongings had been destroyed, and some of them had been injured. Later that night, Edward and I were working on my English again in his tent. Edward, I feel terrible about today.
Don't be.
It's not your fault. But my family,
they were doing what they thought was right. I mean, I can understand why they did it. From their point of view, we're invading their land.
I'm glad you understand. But still, it's not right what they did.
Perhaps.
Edward, can I ask you a question?
Sure, Tarzy. What is it?
How do you tell someone you love them?
Well, you do this.
Edward lifted his hand and cupped my cheek.
I've been thinking a lot about you, and I've realized that I'm in love.
I love you, Edward.
I love you too.
We kissed for the first time, and it was new and wonderful. At that moment, I took back what I believed about humans. They couldn't all be bad, because after all, Edward was human. After we kissed, I left his tent to go sleep in a tree somewhere. When suddenly, I heard noises coming from within the jungle. They were human voices. Curious, I snuck into the jungle, climbed a tree, and headed towards the voices. What I discovered made my mind implode with shock. Edward's friends were all gathered in a circle in hushed voices.
We should do it at dawn.
Agreed. We'll take the apes and lock them up.
We're gonna be rich once we get them back home. Yes! And that stupid little girl has no idea we're about to steal those apes for their special strong hairs.
They all broke into obnoxious laughter while I cowered in shame. How dare they? I had to tell Edward immediately. Surely he could talk some sense into his friends. I rushed back as fast as I could and made it back to Edward's tent, waking him up. Edward! Edward!
Tarzy, what happened?
Your friends, they said they're gonna lock my family up and bring them to England. You have to stop them, Edward.
What?
Yes! You'll tell them not to, won't you? I expected him to scoop me up in his arms and tell me of course he would. Everything would be all right. But he didn't. Not by any stretch of the imagination.
Are you ready?
Edward was speaking to someone behind me. I turned to find the other men at the tent's entrance.
Yes, boss. Good. Sorry, kid. You were right to live with the apes. Us humans, we're not very good creatures.
He jerked his head at the men.
Lock her up!
What? No! Edward! Edward ignored my screams as the men dragged me into a cage and locked me inside. I pushed desperately, trying to break the bars, but to no avail.
How could you do this to me, Edward? It's not personal, Tarzy. Just business.
Edward left me behind without another word. I broke down into tears, feeling great agony in my soul. I felt like my heart was literally breaking in two. The next morning when I woke up, my eyes puffy from crying, I cried out in horror to find my family locked up in tiny cages all around the camp. The men, meanwhile, were laughing at the poor, innocent creatures as they tried to break free. But just like me, they were trapped. Edward, Let them go! Edward glanced at me. Please, Edward, I'll do anything.
You know, it's a shame, Tarzy. You're so beautiful. You would have made a nice wife.
Yes, I will be your wife. I will do as you say. Whatever you want, I will do it. Edward walked closer, intrigued. Just let them go, and I will do as you say. And maybe we can... Just as Edward leaned forward, I reached through the bars and grabbed his collar. I yanked him hard against the cage, knocking him out, then grabbed the keys at his belt. Humans could be so stupid sometimes. Had he really fallen for that trap? I quickly unlocked my cage and stepped out. Finally, freedom! She's out! Tazi's out! The men all swarmed around me in a panic when they noticed I'd escaped. I cracked my neck, rolled my joints, and squatted down on all fours like the true ape that I was. Men, I readied myself. This may hurt. I pounced at them, knocking down one, then the other like flies. They didn't stand a chance against me. This was my island, my terrain. I had grown up here my entire life, while they were mere invaders. I fought them all off, and finally I knocked out the last man. He went crashing into the sand like an empty sack of potatoes. I turned to my family, all locked up. I quickly unlocked all of their cages with the keys I'd stolen, and we gathered together and embraced. I'd missed them so much, and it seemed they had finally accepted me back as well. Accepted me back as well. Accepted me back as well. Accepted me back